Welcome, Cyclone fans, to another episode here of I would say the Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host, Levi Stevenson, also one of the people over there at CF After Dark. Today we are wrapping up, I would say it's men's basketball season, kind of talking about some off-season priorities, about what they need to be focusing on, what's important for them, and just talk a little bit about football and specifically the lack of news around football and just how quiet it's been. And why I think that is a good thing for Jimmy Rogers and his program. Um, I, I would touch on the women's basketball and the just tsunami of transfers out of the program where they're down to two players for sure, maybe three. I think they've got Evangelina Polk, Ariana Jackson coming back for sure, and then Audi Crooks is the only one left on the team, I believe, that is still uh, in question. So, and who knows if she's coming back or not. But besides that, I don't know if there's a lot to talk about really there. We talked a little bit about it a couple weeks or last week or a couple weeks ago um, about that situation and just how I think right now it's Bill finally probably needs to have some more in-depth conversations with Jamie Pollard, with his family, with the coaching staff, with the remaining players he's got left, to figure out exactly what's going on there and what the solution is going forward. Because right now it's just not working and it hasn't worked for a while now. And really the any recent tournament success they've had is because they've had they had a player like Ashley Jones who's good on both ends of the floor, could score in bunches and stuff like that, but like was as good a scorer as like Audi Crooks is, but or maybe not quite as good as Audi Crooks is on the offensive end, but it was a much better defender and things like that. But anyways, we'll talk about that more once we get more clarification on exactly what's going on with that whole situation. Um, Actually, one thing I do want to talk about a little bit beforehand was that there was a report that came out today. I have to find um, the original tweet about it. It came from Ben Portnoy, who is a reporter with. I'm pulling it up here. Let's see here. I'm just gonna pull up the tweet for you. Ben Portnoy. He was reporting the Sports Business Journal, reporting that the Big 12 is looking to add flag football as an official sport, with the competition beginning in 2028. Now, presumably that would be both men's and women's flag football, at least women's flag football. I would assume men's flag football would also be, I would presume men's flag football would also be involved in that, especially since it's a partnership with the NFL, but who knows? But the important part here is that, Iowa State is currently in the process of looking for a new sport to add in place of the now defunct gymnastics program. And I think a lot of people thought and probably still think that women's wrestling is, the clubhouse favorite, the odds on favorite to be that, just because of the unique love that the state of Iowa has for the sport of wrestling, especially at the high school level. You'd have tons of in-state recruits you can pull from. Um, the Wrestling Hall of Fame is in Oklahoma, is at Oklahoma State, I believe. But make no bones about it that historically speaking, Iowa is one of the epicenters of the sport of wrestling. So, I think that still seems like a very good possibility that happens. But with this announcement that they're going to also look into flag football as a potential, or that they're going to be adding flag football as a sponsor for, with hoping of starting in 2028. That to me sounds like a potentially a departure from women's wrestling for Iowa State. I feel like I'd have to, I don't know off the top of my head, but I would have to imagine the setup costs, the startup cost for a flag football program would be less so than that of a women's wrestling program. Flag football can practice indoors. There's a number of facilities I was taking, that they can practice in. The lead recreation facility on the football field they can practice in. My guess is they probably would have access to some of the indoor football facilities, during the off season. There's a lot of facilities already on campus available for them to play in. Plus, if they're playing outdoors, they can use the soccer field, things like that. Uh, you've got facilities there. The equipment's pretty minimal. It's footballs and flags and cleats and stuff and jerseys and whatever else. But the jerseys aren't particularly, um, you don't need tons of extra safety equipment or anything like that. It's just shorts and shirts basically. Um, I'd have to imagine the setup costs for flag football are less than wrestling especially because wrestling needs kind of specialized facilities, and women's wrestling probably could in theory use Iowa State, the men's wrestling um, facilities to start with. My guess is that eventually over time they would probably need to find a plan for the women's to have their own wrestling facility, whether that's renovating the current gymnastics facility into a wrestling room for them or what have you. But that situation would have to be addressed at some point as well. But flag football's got a number of places it can already practice and play games. So that'll be an interesting thing to keep an eye on because you know I would I don't know what the other options would realistically be besides women's wrestling and now flag football, which I think was originally floated. I want to say it was originally floated for Randy Peterson, I believe. Um, but or yeah, I'm not sure who exactly originally floated it, but I think it was Randy Peterson. But I think that's a really interesting idea. I personally would love, I would love to cover a women's flag football team. I think that would be awesome. I would be very much down for that. Now, women's wrestling would be very cool. I don't have as much insider, like I don't have as much in-depth knowledge of wrestling as I do football and basketball and stuff like that. So personally, it would be more of a learning curve for me to pick up on that. But women's flag football, you know, it's different. It's different strategy, different all of that for women's flag football. But I think it would be such an interesting sport to cover. You'd have two football seasons. We can start tailgating women's flag football games. I think it'd be a great time to cover that. Carter wants to know what would recruiting look like for that. That's a great question because Iowa does not currently sponsor high school flag football for boys or girls. I would assume it's potentially coming down the line. I could see a situation where if Iowa State adds it, that they start advocating um to the IGHSAU and the IHSSA about that they start advocating to them to start flag football programs. That would not surprise me. Early on, though, it's an interesting. Um, that's interesting. I mean, you'd have to look around the country to see what flag football programs are available. I mean, there's certainly um, youth leagues, and there's USA football leagues and stuff like that they can look at. As far as like youth USA football leagues that they can take a look at for sure. Um, but it's interesting because you don't, yeah, like you said, you don't have necessarily the currently built-in recruiting base that you currently do with women's wrestling, where Iowa high school already sponsors girls wrestling, so you have a natural feeder system right there. And it's kind of interesting how to approach that. Yeah, so they definitely have lots of youth leagues, but it kind of dies down around middle school, high school in your area, and that yeah, and like I think, but if you have a Division I scholarship program in the state, to me, that should incentivize local leagues to, local, cities and whatever to extend their flag football leagues up to high school. So there may be some club teams, some travel teams, some club teams, things like that. I would think that would help incentivize that a little bit, especially with the Big 12 adding flag football. If Iowa State were to get a team and play a Division I scholarship women's flag football team, I think it'd also behoove them for like any money, maybe the money they would save over, maybe starting a women's wrestling program, the money they would save over doing that, maybe you can invest that into helping, cultivate some more youth programs around the area that go up into the high school level, all the way up to the top level of high school, up through 12th grade, and cultivate some homegrown talent there. I think that would be a fantastic thing to take a look at. What you have to see what's all involved with that, and maybe cities can help and whatever else. But I think that would be a really interesting endeavor for Iowa State to be able to basically cultivate its own recruiting base by creating competitive flag football leagues that go all the way up through high school. and ones that don't just cut off in 8th grade or whatever, that they have 15, 16, 17, 18-year olds, still in high school 18-year olds playing in flag football and uh, finding these athletes that can do that kind of thing. It would not surprise me if it would not surprise me if if I were a coach looking for um if I were a coach looking to start Iowa State's program, I'd first be looking at USA football leagues, like national leagues, club teams. But if you were looking for some initial like kind of homegrown talent a little bit, I think I would be taking a look at the soccer level at the soccer uh teams, because it's a similar-ish type of athlete. Now, obviously using just feet versus using hands and all that for sure. Uh, you can teach people how to catch and all that. Um, but you have some natural athleticism, side to side agility, and all that in soccer that you don't always have in other sports. Basketball, I think you could probably make an argument that they'd be worth looking at. Basketball players and soccer players that maybe you can find a good athlete, but this athlete maybe only has a basketball opportunity at a local D3 school or something like that. And maybe they just decide to do that instead. But maybe you can find, a really good athlete at a small school at a 2A school in Iowa that, their best off, they're a great player, but their best offer is to go play at Wartburg or something, or Luther or Loris or Morningside, and say, "Hey, if you want to follow that, that's great. But I think we can, but you're a good athlete. And I think we can teach you to be a really good football player, a good flag football player. And we can offer you a scholarship, or at least a partial scholarship, to play in the Big 12. So you're playing Division 1 scholarship flag football." I think you could probably convince some people. You can probably convince some high school athletes to do that, because it's an interesting thing to pursue. It's a higher level of competition, even if it's a different sport. And some may take on that opportunity to say, well, I've played basketball my whole life. Maybe I love it, or maybe I'm kind of getting burnt out on it, but I can take my athleticism that came from basketball or came from soccer, and I can apply it to the flag football field. And I think that's a really, really interesting possibility. Do I know if any other conferences in the NCAA have brought it up? I don't know if there are any other conferences. There are a number of other schools that have it, but they're scattered about. They're not really like concentrated in any particular conference. I'll pull it up. Here's a map. This is from collegiateflagfootball.com. So this is a list of NCAA Division 1 women's flag football teams. You can see a bunch of them out here in the East. Looks like the ACC does have a few of them. Georgia Tech, Clemson, Duke. But a lot of these are, I guess those are all club teams though. If you're looking at, let's see if I can find who's actually Division 1 right now. You've got Michigan. Yeah, you've got Michigan, which yeah, it's a weird place to put Michigan on the map. You've got Michigan, Niagara, and Long Island are the only Division 1. Okay, oh, there was on the map. This is a very strange map. Oh, these are okay. This is club teams and this is everything. So, but if you look at like this ECAC here, uh, or independent, like there's just not a lot of them. Alabama State, there's not a lot of them right now. I do know, if I remember seeing it someplace, that Nebraska is getting ready to fire up a program here pretty quick. I have to find it. I believe Nebraska is starting a program up here that's going to start like next year or the year after. But so there's not a lot. So the Big 12 would definitely be the first conference to really dive into it. I think as a conference, besides just having random schools in there. If you saw on there, UCF has a club team, and maybe the Big 12 would encourage them to try to, um, that they would encourage UCF to try to bump that up to a D1 club, to a partial scholarship, or to not club, to a partial scholarship sport, that plays in the Big 12 conference. They may try to do that, and I think that'd be really cool. If I had to guess, if Iowa State, let's say Iowa State goes that route instead of women's wrestling, I still think they should look into women's wrestling if they can make it work financially. Um, but let's say they go flag football and UCF is there, Colorado is already there. Maybe so that's 3 teams there. It wouldn't shock me if like Arizona or Arizona State had a team, BYU put together a team, uh, TCU I could see, Texas Tech I could see putting together a team. There's a few. I wouldn't see Kansas State putting one out, and I wouldn't see Kansas putting one out there. You know, m- I TCU maybe, yeah. Baylor maybe Baylor. I'm not sure. Um, I would guess Arizona and Arizona State would both have flag football teams if they can swing it at financially. I would guess both of the Arizona schools would get flag football teams since they can practice outdoors year round, and presumably they have access to more of like the USA football leagues, like in the Phoenix area and Southern California and things like that. So yeah, there'll be competition nearby, and I think it'd be interesting. It'd be a fascinating thing to follow. I don't really think from what I just I don't know all the money that goes along with either of these sports, and as far as like what they could theoretically bring in for TV revenue or just streaming revenue or whatever. But I I don't know that there's a wrong answer between flag football and women's wrestling. I think either of them would be cool. I think both of them would get a lot of support right away because I think I mean, wrestling is wrestling in the state of Iowa. People will support it. Wrestling has a very fervent fan base. And I think a lot of people would come out to see women's wrestling. Flag football, I would think would get pretty decent initial response because it's unique. We would be one of the few. Would be one of the biggest schools in the country that has a scholarship flag football team or a partial scholarship flag football team. It's kind of unusual. It's compared to like traditional NCAA sports, it's kind of quirky, and I would guess that they would probably play a spring season, spring or yeah, probably spring, maybe summer. But if it's not, as long as they don't put it at the same time as regular football, which would be silly. But if you play it as a spring sport, then people have another football season they can attend. And sure, it's not as you have helmets and pads and all that, but it's still an exciting sport to watch. It's going to be in the Olympics coming up, and it's just another football season, which is cool. We like more football seasons, so I don't think you could really go wrong with either of them. I would personally, just on my own personal preference, I would probably pick flag football, but I'm a football guy, not a wrestling guy. So, anyways, way longer than I was anticipating talking about that, but it's a really interesting thing to keep an eye on going forward. Um, let's talk about a little bit of basketball. I'm not going to go so far into like the game against Tennessee because I know everybody's listened to 1,000 podcasts already about it. We're 4 or 5 days moved on from it already, and it's just a yeah 4 days moved on from it already. So it's just kind of like it's already been kind of talked out. I think we've moved on to the off season, but I think the first time I knew that was going to be a rough game, and then I thought it was like this is an uphill thing. They're going to have to play really, really, really well to win this game. Was when they flashed the starting lineups on the screen, and Tennessee was starting 3 guys 6'10" or over, which I was like, and you look with Joshua Jefferson out, and you start Nate Heise, 6'5" Nate Heise in his place, which 6'5" Nate, may or may not be generous for Nate Heise. The guy plays like he's 6'8" or 6'9", but unfortunately that is not 6'10" and lanky and athletic like Nate Ament is. It was a tough game. They got out rebounded, horribly, and that's because they just didn't have the size down low. You can't play Buchanan and play it at the same time currently because just neither of them are good enough offensively to have them both on the floor at the same time. But then that means that they were basically rebounding by themselves against 3 functionally 7 foot tall players. That's really tough to do. they were going to need to get hot from three. They needed to knock down the free throws, which they absolutely did not. That will be a lesson for TJ's program going forward for sure. I don't have it necessarily as one of my specific offseason priorities, but I think it goes without saying that Iowa State's performance in the free throw line this past season was not good, or downright kind of unacceptable. Some players way, way below where they need to be. Blake Buchanan, I know bigs are not generally the best free throw shooters. I get it. Um, it's big hands are hard to shoot with. I get it. Under 50% for I don't care how big you are. I don't care how tall you are. I don't care how big your hands are. 49% just ain't gonna cut it. Um, yeah, the carry off the bench, basically just Rico Gathers reincarnate. He was a nightmare to deal with. Um, yeah, it was just it's a really tough matchup. And yeah, just out of curiosity, I looked this up. Um, I know that there's a lot of people that like to use hand size and all that. It's just in like a weird angle to the rim as far as like why it's hard to shoot, why it's hard for bigs to shoot free throws. Victor Wembanyama shoots 81.6% from the line. One of the tallest NBA players ever, has to have some of the biggest hands ever, shoots over 80% from the line. If Victor Wembanyama can shoot over 80% from the line, Blake Buchanan can hit 60%. That has to be better, period. Like there were other players that needed to be better from the line. Like Taman Lipsey could have been better from the line. Now, there's nothing for him to do in the offseason because unfortunately he has graduated. And hopefully is immediately on the fastest possible track to having his jersey retired. Was Robert Jones ever that bad? I believe I'm going to look this up right now. But I believe he was also quite poor from the free throw line. Let's see. Robert Jones from the free throw line. Get my ad blockers on. Great. Let's see. From the free throw line. Yeah, that's no good. Shot 30% his first year at Iowa State, 40%, then got it up to 51% in his third year at Iowa State. So even by his third year at Iowa State, not good. This is just a fascinating number here. And obviously didn't shoot very many, but he didn't shoot a ton of free throws to begin with. So that's kind of hard to deal with. But yeah, Robert Jones was somehow worse than Blake Buchanan at hitting free throws. But that's the thing that Blake specifically needs to work on for this offseason. So what I want to talk about, though, I want to dive more into the offseason priorities and what they need to take care of going forward. We kind of know what happened. If Joshua Jefferson plays against Tennessee, they probably win that game 7 out of 10 times or more. Without him, they were going to win that maybe 2 out of 10 times. Maybe. It was a tough game, bad matchup in terms of size and strength and athleticism and rebounding. Yeah, it just wasn't going to go well. And we found out later too after the game that Joshua was not close to ready for the game and would not have been able to go versus Michigan either. So, even if you somehow beat Tennessee, you're not beating Michigan without Joshua Jefferson. So in the end, it was kind of just doomed as soon as he went down. And I feel terrible for him because you could, that the video of him crying in the locker room afterwards is heart wrenching because, this was his opportunity to make a run and go for it. And he was just robbed of that opportunity, and it sucks. But unfortunately that is the cruel nature of the NCAA tournament and college basketball and sports in general. It's tough, and it just kind of is what it is, unfortunately. But first priority of the offseason, retain. They need to retain talent. Obviously, the biggest name here is Milan Momcilovic. I think the general feeling is that when he's going to declare for the draft, like he would be stupid not to. Him declaring for the draft is basically a non-story. With you being able to declare for the draft, go through the evaluation process, and then come back, you'd be You'd be silly not to. If you think you have a career in professional basketball available to you down the road, you'd be very silly to not declare for the NBA draft. Even if you 100% are planning on coming back, it's free feedback from pro scouts. He will declare for the NBA draft. I think the general feeling is that he's probably a better than 50-50 shot to come back. Uh, Part of it, I'm sure, will depend on money, what he can make in the NBA as a second round, probably a second round pick next year. I mean, if he gets feedback that he's going to be a mid to late first round pick, then I think you probably jump on it. And because you know, you take it, it's guaranteed money and all that. Next year's draft class is most likely going to be weaker than this year's draft class. This year had tons and tons and tons of good freshmen. So it's a pretty stacked lottery. And then, everyone that's like a fringe lottery guy will probably slide into the 20s just because of how good this class is. So there's benefit to him waiting around as well, just because the draft class next year should be a little bit lighter. He has a chance to get taken a little bit earlier, jump into that first round. Plus, I think there's also development for him to be doing as well, where he's a shooter. He's a shooter first and foremost, and that's just what he does. I think he could absolutely work on his defensive toughness. I think he could work on his playmaking with the ball in his hand a little bit. Because the NBA teams will see what Tennessee was able to do to him. Milan was doing his best to fight through some of through some of that hand fighting and stuff like that. He was doing his best, but Tennessee eliminated him from the game. And I think NBA teams will probably see that, and they'll understand that, like, yeah, Tennessee dedicated their entire defensive game plan to don't let Milan Momcilovic even touch the ball, and we'll just deal with the rest of it. They'll be able to look at that and see that, but they'll also be able to look at it and see that he wasn't able to do much because he's not quick enough to get himself open in some situations without screens, stuff like that. Like, they're going to see that. And there's more that Momcilovic could do on the defensive end in rebounding. He could absolutely be a much more active rebounder. He could be a much more active defender. I think there's room to grow in all those categories. Even if at the NBA, he's going to be pretty much just a spot up shooter, which is fine. There's more that Milan can add to his game for sure. And if he doesn't think he's going to be a first round pick, if he's going to be a second round pick, which is not great money, it's not guaranteed money. You're probably on a 2-way deal right away at best, if not just a straight up G League deal. And you're just going to you got to kind of just grind it out. Or you can come back to Iowa State. You can keep working on it. You can keep developing yourself as a player and still make pretty decent, pretty good money. That may be enough to sway him to come back. And I think a lot of people generally believe that he will come back, but it'll all depend on what kind of feedback he gets from the scouts, and we'll see how that goes. I think Blake Buchanan will probably be back. I don't know if he's for sure confirmed he has or not. Any chance he would transfer and stay in college? No. Milan will either be at Iowa State or he will be in the NBA. Period. There's a less than 0.1% chance that he ends up at a different university next year. Bloom is hinting that he's got $3 million coming. That would not shock me. My guess is something like I don't know, if like a Hy-Vee or a Principal Financial or some like financial heavy hitter in the state of Iowa can come back and get him a pretty significant deal. So Blake has said he's coming back. Okay, so Blake Buchanan's back. I think people kind of assume Toure and Plata will both be back. You typically don't see the international players transferring around quite as much, unless they're specifically like at a lower level and transferring up, like transferring out of the Valley into a power conference or something like that. So Bateman, all of them are back. So you've got that whole core back, and that's great. You got to keep them now. As we found out with like Oscar Clough last year, that and Joshua Jefferson with the LSU offer that came out of nowhere, that shit can change. Agents will shop their guys around. Like, I would be blown away if Killian Toure's agent will not continue to shop him around through the offseason. And Jamarian Bateman, their agents absolutely will continue to shop him around through the offseason. I would be shocked if they didn't, because they're both young, talented players with very clear upside. Yeah, Jamarian Bateman clearly can become a very, very good 3 and D guy for sure. You know, what's his ceiling look like as like a he's probably only ever going to be at most a combo guard, but he's really more of just like a 3 and D type scoring guard that can sometimes attack, that's athletic enough to attack the rim here and there. But you're probably never going to play him like as a point guard, at least as we currently see him. He could evolve this offseason and change that entirely. But currently, I'd say at most he projects as a combo guard. But Killian Toure, obviously, is an incredible defender at the point guard position, is in will clearly develop into a very obvious point guard. Um, I think you can look at him and clearly see a lot of upside. You know, his shots not his jump shots definitely not broken. It could be with an offseason spent with some good trainers, can probably clean it up a little bit, make it a little bit more efficient. But the jumper is not broken. He can knock down some shots. Towards the end of the season, he absolutely got his confidence back and was knocking down some jumpers. Some of those like step back mid ranges were really, really good. Really, really nice shots. And he got his 3-point stroke back and towards the end of the season. That stuff I believe will develop throughout the offseason. So you've got some really high end potential there with those two guards. Plata, when he was in Europe, it was actually more of a tall wing, basically. Like he can actually play on the perimeter a little bit if you kind of let him there. That wasn't his role on this team. He was supposed to be tall and rebound. But he can, if you watch his Europe tape, he can kind of stroke it a little bit. He can be able to shoot. They can develop him into being a legit stretch four type of thing. And stretch four with now some experience banging down low and getting rebounds. I think that would be a great role for Plata. If Plata can eventually become, in the mold, not necessarily, as good as, but in the mold of a Kevin Love, where you got a really great rebounder, a competent enough defender in the low post. I'm talking like collegiate Kevin Love, not NBA, not 10-year vet NBA Kevin Love, where he's basically just a rebounder and a spot up shooter. I'm not talking that. I'm talking like collegiate Kevin Love, where he can score down low, but he's a really good rebounder, has the ability to step outside. And you said not sure Plate is athletic enough to play four. I disagree with that. I think he's a better athlete than we give him credit for. I think he's just a little awkward right now because I think he was trying to get used to. I think he was probably trying to get used a little bit to uh, the narrower lane that we have and dealing with the traffic in there, and just kind of reorienting himself a little bit. He didn't get a full off season because he had those issues with his visa, and so I think a full off season will help him get a lot more comfortable, and his athleticism will be able to stand out a little bit more because they'll have a better platform to build him from, and he'll have a better idea of what he needs to do. He can be more comfortable in the system and with the American college game as well. And Blake Buchanan, I don't know what the growth looks like for Blake Buchanan. I mean, the free throw line obviously is an area of growth. You'd like to see Blake put on some beef. Get him an extra 10 or 15 pounds so he can bang. Excuse me, so he can bang down low a little bit. I think that's the thing for Blake, but I don't like realistically. What are you adding to Blake's game at this point in his career? Maybe you keep working his touch around the rim a little bit. You hopefully you can maybe get a little bit more out of him on the boards. At this point in Blake's career, he's a little bit of a finished product. Maybe he gets better at distributing out of pick and roll situations or out of handoff situations. I hope we don't just continue to just run every single damn offensive possession out of a fucking high handoff from Blake Buchanan again. But if that's how they're going to do it again, then Blake needs to be a better distributor off of that. He's just because of how late he is in his career, he's obviously got the smallest room, the least amount of room to grow in the offseason. But he can still get better for sure. But the tandem of Toure and Bateman, So I would love to see Blake Buchanan average 5+ assists. That is very difficult for a big man, though. Like, it's an unusual skill for a big man to average 5+ assists, especially in an offense that is not going to be geared around him handling the ball. I don't. Did Joshua Jefferson even average 5 assists? Actually, yeah, he did for sure. Um, but but Joshua Jefferson's an anomaly. He is a point forward. I'm looking it up real quick. So this season he averaged five. He averaged 4.8 assists. Even Joshua Jefferson did not average 5 assists. And Joshua Jefferson is a whole ass point forward. Blake Buchanan is never going to average 5 assists. That's a huge number for a big man. If you can get 2 or 3 out of him a game, I think you'd be happy with it. But him getting more comfortable with scoring around the rim, getting some more low post moves, some more touch, and being able to back guys down and score out of that consistently, I think would be a good development for him. But Torrey and Bateman are clearly that's your path forward, and saying, okay, these two guys are going to be the centerpiece of our offensive attack next season. Yeah, maybe we'll see what Mason Williams looks like when he's healthy, assuming Mason Williams comes back. I guess I don't know if we've gotten any sort of word about him yet. But assuming he's coming back, Mason Williams will probably factor into that somehow. And he's kind of what he is in the model of like a DeAndre Kane, definitely a physical bullying guard that can get downhill and be physical in the lane. And he's just he's a big dude. He's bigger than you think he is. So maybe that's your combo guard, kind of like DeAndre Kane was, and let Toure be a defensive stalwart and a distributor at the point guard spot, and just be happy with what scoring you get out of him, and then let Bateman be your guy along with Milan Momcilovic. The issue with Milan Momcilovic, though, is he's not big enough to play the 4. I don't think he's not athletic enough. To play the 4 in college basketball, you either need to be very athletic or you need to be big. And Milan Momcilovic is tall, but he's not big. He's fairly slender at 6'8", and he's not super athletic. He's not a great rim protector. He's not, he's an okay defender out on the perimeter, but he's not, you can't ask him to defend down low. So, you probably need to play him at the 3, whatever, in basketball anymore. Positions are positions, but you play Milan at the 3. That's where you have to keep him, even if he's a 6'8" guy there. Need a transfer 4 above all else. I would agree with it. So actually, you're getting ahead of me here. Because my next point here was finding size, especially at the 4 and 5. We saw the clear disadvantage to, obviously, it's playing kind of small ball towards the end, especially with Joshua Jefferson out, having to play a lot of small ball. God bless Nate Heisey, but he was just not big enough to deal with Nate Ament or any of the or Carey or any of Tennessee's size down low. I mean, the guy, like I said, guy plays like he's 6'10", but unfortunately that only gets you so far when the other guy is actually 6'10" and is just as athletic as you are. So they need to find out. They need to find some size down there, and not just like size. I mean, Eric Mulder is tall. Just having size it's not enough. You need to find size that plays with a high motor. If you can find a Hassan Ward in this class, maybe a little bit more polished than a Hassan Ward, but something like that. I think that's a really interesting possibility, especially if they're in the 6'8", 6'9", 6'10" range. I think you'd love to see that. We saw it a lot this season, that length bothered Iowa State quite a bit, and I would have to imagine that bothered the staff and TJ a little bit, and they weren't able to stockpile a ton of it this year. But going forward, I think it's very clear that the defense would be better if you can find some athletic guys with some length. The defense only gets better because traps are harder to throw out of when the guy's 6'8" than it is when they're 6'3". So if you can find some athletic length there, and especially a good rebounder, ideally the best possible. This is going to sound, I know it's funny because this is like the exact everybody says if you had to, if you had to take a past Cyclone and just put him on this team, which Cyclone would you pick? And for any team, the answer, like 99% of the time, is I would want Dustin Hogue to be on this team, maybe Melvin Edgem. Just having a guy that just goes up and gets some damn boards, makes the hustle plays, makes the dirty plays, and you can get some uh offensive production out of him here and there. But for the most part, you're not relying on him necessarily, even if he's capable of going off randomly, like we saw from Dustin Hogue against UConn in that Sweet 16 game. Deontay Burton, sort of. Deontay Burton is the type of athlete and the length that you would like to see. Like I believe Deontay Burton in this system would be cheating borderline with his athleticism, his length, and his just go get a bucket ability. Deontay Burton being a part of TJ's trapping defense would be disgusting. Disgusting. Unfortunately, Deontay Burton is basically an alien in terms of athleticism and strength and size. Um, you're probably not going to find another Deontay Burton probably ever because he's just a unicorn as far as his size and athleticism and quickness and everything goes. But if you could find a Melvin Edgem that can bang down low, get some rebounds, knock down a couple jump shots, that helps you a lot. And like I said, I realize I just asked them to find a guy in the offseason that resembles someone who's going to have his name and his jersey in the rafters next year. I understand I just asked for that. But the incoming recruiting class is interesting. We'll pull that up. I don't know what this is. It's my Twitter notifications, apparently. Oh, it's because I have the wrong window selected. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So you've got Dorian Ronaldo, Comlin. He's a center, 6'10". He, I believe, is the guy that he's also from France and is friends with Kylian Touré. So, yeah, we'll see how that plans. We'll see how that works out. I think he's pretty raw, probably, but could absolutely be just a size and motor guy right away. Size, motor, rim protection, that kind of thing. Maybe a lob threat, something like that. I don't think he's going to be I don't think he's a super I don't think his skills are going to be super refined. Right? I want to say he's not a high skill guy because you have to be somewhat of a skill guy just to play in college basketball. But I don't know if he's not a super, he's on the other end of the spectrum from George Niang, who obviously was incredibly skilled coming in, great passer, great ball handler, great scorer. Dorian is to me your classic, big, long, athletic five that can just catch lobs and protect the rim. Very much Jameel McKay-ish. And if Jameel McKay is his ceiling, then you got a really nice player there in DRK. Jackson Kiss, I haven't had a chance to watch a ton of his tape yet. Obviously, he's fairly well rated. Christian Wiggins was named Mr. Basketball from Minnesota this week. Really like him. He can get buckets, competes defensively. We'll see. He could very much be like next year's Jamarian Bateman, where he comes in, he doesn't play a ton of minutes right away, but eventually just works his way into playing a bunch later. I know Jamarian Bateman, I believe he was in the starting lineup in the first game, but eventually kind of hit his slump a little bit, and then they started bringing him off the bench, and we really found his stride as a sixth man. But I could absolutely see Christian Wiggins, just being a sixth man to start off with, and eventually developing into a guy that they just got to play because he keeps getting buckets. And Yusuf Gray I think he's more of a developmental guy right away. I don't think he'll probably play a lot, especially if Mason Williams sticks around. I don't think Yusuf Gray will play a lot next year, but that's okay. He may not love it, but that's just kind of where it is. We'll see. Over on Cyclone Fanatic, Chris Williams / Jake Bren put out a list of a bunch of guys that we might be looking at in the transfer portal. That one, guys are coming out all the time right now. There's a lot of names that we're going to be finding out over the next week or two that I think are really, really interesting. And there's a few obvious ones they can go after. I saw one earlier at yeah, free tag, fry tag. I believe he's the one. Yeah, I keep mixing up him and I keep mixing up him and yeah, Daniel Freitag because we recruited him out of high school. I keep mixing up him and the kid from North Dakota State. Um, but Daniel Freitag has last season. So he started his career at Wisconsin, and then last season he averaged uh, almost 20 points a game, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. Shot 36% from three, 41% from the field. I love that productivity there. The great um he was like their main dude, but I have you have to like that productivity. That's just a guy that can go get buckets, and you kind of have to appreciate that about him. I'm just pulling. I'm gonna pull up his Ken Palm page here real quick. So yeah, so Freitag. I don't know. Put up a pretty good year last year. Decent offensive rating there. But he was like, right, he had this percent of possessions, percent of shots. I mean, that's like a huge, I mean, literally number one in the conference. As far as just usage rates. I mean, he took all their shots and stuff like that. And that's okay. That's what you're kind of expecting out of your star players. But guy just gets buckets, and you like that out of a guy. Shoots 82% from the free throw line. Very much like that. Very much okay with that. Plus, he's from Bloomington, Minnesota, so he's not local, but you know, Twin Cities are kind of local enough that you're fine with that. Um, he'll be a guy to watch for sure. I another scoring guard would be nice. But what I also my third point here that the thing they need to take care of, they need to replace Nate Heisey. And what I mean is they need to find another junkyard dog, go get him guy, Dustin Hogue, that type of player. Because unfortunately, with this class, you're losing two of them. You're losing Taman Lipsey and Nate Heisey, who both made the hustle plays. They made the tough plays. They made tough shots. Um, Nate Heisey obviously gets tons and tons of credit for the Houston shot, but he was amazing down the stretch, especially in the tournament. Nate Heisey played the best basketball of his Iowa State career down the stretch in the tournament, in the Big 12 tournament and the NCAA tournament. He was awesome, especially after Joshua Jefferson got hurt. But you're losing two hustle guys now. That's tough. For a TJ Altenberger team that prides itself on making the hustle plays, you got to find another guy, whether it's maybe Plata, maybe you replace Nate Heisey, but by Dom Plata becoming Nate Heisey, where you can shoot, maybe you let him post up in the corner, let him spot up in the corner a little bit, and maybe he can knock down 32 to 35% of them, goes and chases down rebounds, defends at the rim. Maybe you can develop Dom Plata into being just a 6'8", 6'9" Nate Heisey. And if you can do that, that's awesome. Yeah, Johnson from Bradley seems like a natural, like he would be a natural successor to Taman Lipsey, both in terms of play style and his size, because he's only 5'11", but dude's a bulldog, which I don't know how else you would describe Taman Lipsey, but a bulldog that's a little bit undersized. I don't. Yeah, he's gonna be coveted, but I think he would fit TJ's system pretty well if he can play defense the way Taman Lipsey played defense. But they need to replace Nate Heisey, and like I said, whether that's with a new player from someplace else or with developing somebody like Dom Plata into being that guy. They need to replace that role on the team, and I think Dom Plata is a perfect candidate to be that guy. They just got to develop him that way. And this kind of goes in, and we've talked about it kind of on and off here a little bit too, but developing those three, Torrey, Plata, and Bateman, because Torrey and Bateman especially can both be your platform going forward, at least through next year and um, potentially into 28 as well. And who's going to replace Eric Mulder? Jackson Kiss, maybe. But you know, obviously if those guys really take off next season and have really, really excellent years, maybe they both leave for the NBA. But right now, you know, I would not project either of them to do that right now. They may be here for 2, 3, maybe here for another 2 years. They may be here through, into their junior season or something like that. So you got a chance to build a little bit of a core right here. And Toure, you can tell, is so close to being right there. If you can continue to improve his decision making as far as orchestrating the offense, especially through the pick and roll, getting him to be more decisive off of pick and rolls, uh, and you can get Jamarian Bateman to learn how to control his energy, because you can tell in some of the big games, you can tell he's excited. You can tell the adrenaline's really pumping because he is just all over the place. He's everywhere, and he's trying to just make plays. He's missing some shots, and the shots aren't, he's missing he's missing one short, he's missing one long into the right, he airbanks another one, and then eventually he gets a little more comfortable and he cashes one or two of them. But you could tell in some of the big games he was a little bit overamped, and he just needs to learn to control that energy a little bit. But it's hard not to be excited about what you saw from him. He's clearly going to develop into being a very good shooter. And I think he's a really underrated defender right now, and I think he continue to be that. He can be a better version of like a Naz Long, what Naz Long was later in his career, where he was a true 3-and-D guy, especially towards the end, that could attack the basket a little bit. Jamarian Bateman has that kind of like potential to be basically just a new Naz Long, where he can just be a guy that you can count on to knock down big shots. He can attack the rim and finish when you need him, be a sneaky good finisher at the rim, be a good wing defender. Jamarian Bateman can be Naz Long, and he can develop him into that. He's really not far away from being that. So, you can build that core. You can build around that core. And I think, like I said, in Dom Plate, I think you have a couple different options you could go with. You could continue to develop him in the low post and continue to try to ask him to learn how to be and play bigger, and just to become a true 5. And I think you can do that. That's an option. But I think especially if you watch his tape when he played in Europe, I'm just so intrigued by the skill that is just sitting there unused currently. That he was just not asked. He was not asked to be a wing player, not asked to be a shooter, not asked to attack off the dribble or anything. He's not asked to do any of that this year. But some of that skill is just kind of sitting there waiting to be tapped into. And I think if you go the route of developing him to be your hustle guy, to be your new Nate Heisey, I'm really intrigued by that. Because if you can make Nate Heisey 6 inches taller, boy, howdy, is that a good basketball player. And Plate is, he's tall and he's not like super lanky though. He's got a little bit of beef to him, and I think with a full off season in a college basketball program, in a high end college basketball program, I think he could, he'll get his body in the best shape it can be. I'm really intrigued by the idea of expanding Dom Plata's game to allow him to use some of that length farther away from the rim than just trying to turn him into another 5. I think there's just too much there that you don't want to just leave on the table, I think. So that's what I've got for basketball for this week. I may, obviously, if any of you guys have more questions that you want to ask or anything like that, certainly we'll continue to address that. There's not really a lot there's not a lot going on with football to talk about specifically, but it has been a very quiet spring practice so far for Jimmy Rogers. And part of that was because basketball was doing its thing, and he's been able to fly pretty much under the radar. We've seen a few posts from the Twitter and Instagram accounts for Cyclone football and all that, with just like a few like little clips here and there. But the social media team hasn't been as active during this spring, um, during these spring sessions as they have been maybe in past fall camps and things like that. And part of it, I think, is because they've got a new social media team. But you know, we haven't seen like a ton of stuff, just a few clips. They're like a play here and there. Like I think we saw a clip of Drew Sir just making an interception in practice one time. Um, I saw one clip earlier. I believe it was Omari Hayes just cutting and making a catch on a route type of thing. And I think that's probably kind of by design. I mean, it's very clear to me that when Jimmy Rogers is doing press conferences that he hates doing press conferences. He hates doing media availability. He would rather be doing anything else besides talking to the media. And I respect the hell out of that. Um, and that's why I kind of think that he's probably okay with just doing his thing, being under the radar. Now, I'm sure he realizes that, this isn't South Dakota State. This ain't even Washington State. You know, is Iowa State a blue blood? Obviously not. But this is very clearly a larger, more publicly visible program than South Dakota State and even Washington State. It is just there's more eyeballs on this program, both from inside the immediate, local media sphere and outside looking in as well. There's just more eyeballs on him than at any other position he's ever been at. And I'm sure he realizes that comes with you got to talk to the media. And it's not going to be, one or two dudes, just talking to you all casual, like after the presser. This is going to be you get done with your press conference, you stepped off to the side, and 10 reporters are in your face immediately with microphones and recorders and all that. And it's just a higher pressure environment. And, I think he's up for the task, but it's a different thing. So I think he's probably, I get the impression that he's probably enjoying being able to fly under the radar up to this point. That's going to change going forward, especially, maybe this week people are still reviewing basketball and all that. But once we get closer and closer to the spring showcase, I think once we really see that spring showcase and we see kind of what's what, uh, you know, which player, just get to first look at this new roster. Excuse me. Excuse me. Apparently need to find some caffeine. But once people get this first look at this roster, the attention on the program will start to heat up. But you know, we're getting closer to that. That is it's April 25th, I believe, is when it's on the calendar. And I'm personally excited to start really diving in to football here. I can tell you right now that we'll do some stuff on this one as well, and this channel as well. But I know we're over at CF After Dark. I'm currently working with Jackson Pence and the rest of the CF After Dark team. We've got a host of off-season content, uh, especially Jackson and I will be doing a video at some point of us breaking down the finer details of a 4-2-5 defense. It's going to be a real nerd breakdown of a 4-2-5, and I think that'll be a lot of fun. Carter says, how much of an idea of a depth chart would we get from the spring showcase? I don't know. The Campbell staff always put out a spring depth chart. I believe. Actually, I don't know if we had a spring roster. Maybe I don't know if we had a spring depth chart. Now that I think about it, that's a great question. I don't know if we ever had spring depth charts, so I don't know that we'll be able to We don't know if we'll ever get an official one, but my guess is we'll probably get at least some feel of it. I mean, we we'll probably get a pretty good idea. If I think we're all going in assuming Jalen Rayner is going to be the starter. I think we'll get a pretty good idea fairly quickly if that is indeed the case. We'll also may get an idea if Connor, how into this Connor Mobley is, like how close he is to being available for this type of thing. We'll see. But I was trying to pull up a depth chart, see if there was anything from last year, but need the CFAD guys, the After Dark guys, to do an SNL news desk type skit during the offseason. Honestly, that's kind of the stuff that we're looking at doing, just as we have some more freedom to do that kind of stuff now. So that's a good idea. And it's something that we have lightly discussed before. Yeah. So that's one thing too, is that the staff is heavy on the recruiting trail right now as well. Specifically, they're getting after Texas a little bit. And we talked about that a few weeks ago, how they're really starting to dive into Texas now, which is great. It's a state that the last staff basically completely ignored, and they got a few guys from there, but for the most part, they really didn't try to hit Texas. And it sounds like the staff wants to go after it, which is great. So, um, but yeah, that's it's it. It's so far it's pretty quiet from Jimmy Rogers and his staff, but I think we'll get more news, we'll get more clips, things like that. I think they will. I think we will heat that stuff up a little bit more um, in the coming weeks, and it's next week we'll get back to mostly football at this point. So I think that is kind of the gist for this week. Um. Oh, so so live shows. I can tell you right now that we will be planning on doing some post games from like live post games, like from the RV lots after some of the home games and stuff like that. And maybe we'll do something from we'll probably do something from the spring showcase. We'll figure something out, or whether it's that day or that night or something like that. Because I believe that same night is Size House of Trivia is the same night as the spring showcase. So we might figure something out there, but we're going to wrap her up for today. Hope everybody enjoyed this episode of I Would Say Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm Levi Stevenson. We will see you guys all again next week. We'll dive more into football next week, especially with if there's basketball transfers, we'll obviously talk about those as well, but we're going to dig a little bit more into football next week as well. So thanks for watching. We'll be back next Tuesday. Oh, CF After Dark Apparel is open yet? I do not. No, not just yet. Very close. And then, if anyone hasn't seen this hat yet, something like that, there's like the CF After Dark rope hat will be one of those things. So thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next week.